Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming in the cold. And I know there are many more people online from the comfort of their homes. And welcome. Come in and make yourself comfortable. So this is the last event of the semester. And this event was long in the making. So Chloe Garcia Roberts and I have been discussing maybe putting on an event like this for, I think, about a year. We have the occasional lunch in Harvard Square where Chloe, who's the poetry editor of the Harvard Review, has really mentored me with peripheries and helped me a lot. Thank you, Chloe. But we, our conversations quickly veer from the administrative to the content of the journals and then to our own writing and our own translation. Chloe is a translator from Spanish and Chinese and wrote about translation as theology. Her book is here. So we wanted to host an event at the Div School thinking about translation, but we were already understanding it in the widest terms as her book does. As one way in which creation gets going, as time starts happening, as one moment transforms into the next, getting lost or retained, slowly decaying and dilating, in which something incarnates, maybe a self, then contracts, spills over, and is released. So you see, we were thinking about translation in a very wide sense. So we didn't invite people to discuss their translations from different languages, which was originally our idea, but we were thinking about poets who also think with translation, whose work moves between realms with a consciousness of what is lost and transformed. So we invited Julie Carr and Laynie Browne to join us today. I'm going to introduce all the three poets at once and briefly so we can just focus uninterrupted on their words. First, Chloe. Chloe Garcia Roberts is lecturer of poetry at MIT. I have mentioned her book of translation as theology. It's called Fire Eater, and it's here. And her translation from Chinese and from Spanish. And so I'm just going to... Chloe will speak first. I'm just going to quickly introduce Julie and then Laynie. So when Chloe and I were discussing this, we were thinking about different exchanges between poetry and prose, but also more elementary exchanges between sort of the electrical circuitry of muscles and movement to action, from the emission of air to words, that form ideas, and how these exchanges could be thought about as communion, as metamorphosis, as sites for alchemical transformation, and thinking about what governs that. For Julie Carr, language, alchemy as one word means one thing and then another. It's thinking about lines of poetry, of her poetry, to draw a muscle, to draw a gun, 24 and done for, and sound patterns, making one thing into another thing. And for Laynie Browne, form, how the list, for example, makes a word into an impetus to act, form as a means of locomotion and transformation. Julie Carr is the author of 15 books. I'm not going to mention everyone's awards, okay? Because it just takes a long time. And you can read the bios. Most recent book is The Garden, which is also over here, which is the first in a trilogy called Overflow, and her work overflows in collaboration with other genres, prose, dance, video art, and music. She is the co-founder of Counterpath Press, which I didn't know is also a gallery and a community garden, and is a lecturer at Colorado. Laynie Browne's recent books include Apprentice to a Breathing Hand, and Everyone and Her Resemblances, and Intaglio Daughter, which I had noticed is a publication every year, And there have been many honours and awards there, which I'm not going to mention. And Laynie works at the university, lectures at the University of Pennsylvania. So that's my very short introduction. And Chloe, you read first.
Thank you, Shira. It's wonderful to be here tonight on this dark November night. I've been wanting to read from this book here since it came out, so it feels like a full circle. This book, Fire Eater, A Translator's Theology, is a series of poem essays, and I picked two to read for you tonight that I think speak to, we'll be able to, Julie and Laynie and I will be able to continue or voice the conversation that absolutely exists between these three books. Kind of serendipitously, it was really wonderful when this event came together that we just kept finding so many lines of connection between them. But these are two pieces that I think speak to their work and to their wonderful projects. So the first piece is called Whens. Remember when one morning we were home alone, and instead of letting me brush out the tangles in your hair, you asked to brush mine? Because you were so small, I sat cross-legged on the floor. At first, the weight was too unwieldy for your tiny fat hand, and the brushing was more like being beaten softly about the head. But after a few minutes, you got the hang of it and found your rhythm, rowing the brush roughly down the length of my hair, lifting your arm to the crown of my head, letting it drift down again, lifting your arm to the crown of my head, letting it drift down again. Then, behind the slow shushing of the brush, behind the curtain of hair hanging around my face, behind my eyes closed underneath, an other side opened, a hallway into a wen of you brushing my hair when I was no longer able. I felt just under the skin of my body, strong and capable as a mother, another body, weak and older, a self faintly felt of what was to come, not what was. I felt the weight of both of your hands, the baby, the woman, my responsibility, my caretaker, all in unison for a breath. And I do not say moment or second because that implies a unit of linear time, and this was not of that rubric, but rather a transversal touching together of different times. I heard the sound of the brush, the sound of your breathing, the sound of the morning behind my eyelids, but in two places, 2 points on a life. Together, you and I, we had brushed open a wens. The reason a certain moment can seem suspended from the stream has nothing, in fact, to do with the present in which it occurs, but is instead a result of a number of future instances that exact moment is recalled, remembered, replayed. This phenomenon is actually just our future selves overthinking the happening in question, which in turn breaks down its structure, its constitution, like worn cloth or hollowed stone. This is the reason why the noise of life can sometimes silence itself, thin itself, to one tenuous thought, like a silvery tendon spanning 2 dense slabs of muscled darkness, also known as the future and the past. Some people refer to this clarity, this one-note knowing, as intuition, which is false, primarily because it does not come from within intuition, but from without. It is not a product of what you are, i.e., what you have become, but of what you will become, washing backwards. Wens, then, is a term for the tunnel between, the backward runnel which allows simultaneity to draw together, to bridge 2 distinct times. So in this case, I will be in a bed, in morning light, silent under your brushing, thinking backward to that first time under your hand. Eventually, every life will prove the existence of innumerable tiny currents running like this one from the future to the past, even if they are largely undetectable and invisible, even if, like lines of faint embossing, they are easier felt than seen. An experience of this phenomenon, a face you remember loving before you saw it, for example, is a clue one could use to determine that in this way the true future lies. To experience a wens is proof we live in a river that runs always, always. I've always thought that the best birth story I've ever read is that part in Huckleberry Finn, when departing his own bloody murder scene, he unfolds himself into a boat and drifts into a mist shot with voices from this shore, this one, and the other. Because he was in two places at once, and also neither one, because he was between the shores, because he was a bridge, or maybe better, he was becoming a bridge, because he was a wens. At least this is how it was for me when I reached for you, when you came to me, blind as a boat, floating on the currents of others' voices, the waves of others' touch, the deeps of pain, when we were both listening for the other. When I was a body of water in which you were surfacing, when I was the sway, the stretch, the snap of molecules, and when from beneath you rose, una ola, a wave, una ala, a wing. My own birth story, or the one that is not my mother's to tell, happened one afternoon several years ago in a blackout over the whole lower half of the city. I wanted to be home and foolishly decided to try and navigate the lightless hallways of my apartment building alone to get there. After climbing the stairs in muffled light from high and far-off windows, I opened the heavy fire door to my floor, taking a quick look in the gray of what direction I needed to go. But when the door shut behind me, it shut so darkly, it was as if it had never existed. And when I stepped with fingers outstretched into the deepness, I was unmoored, eyeless. At first I refused to believe in my powerlessness and floundered forward. But with each step, I lost myself a little more, feeling that strange vertigo, particular to pitch blackness, when the borders of the body start to inflate, then reduce, then waver. When finally I realized I was unable to reach my home and that I was also incapable of returning the way I had come, I began to cry for help. And after a few minutes, someone silently opened the door behind me, and an oar of sunlight cracked the dark. I found myself just a few steps from my own door in a corner. I had been asking for help from a wall. For the rest of my life, as long as I am there, pressing myself against the faceless, unanswering wall of God, when behind me a door opens, a slight wing of light. This was a wens also, though a different type. Not a bridge connecting 2 points, but the surge under the span, the flood. A decade ago, I was driving with my mother across the country. As we drew closer to Mississippi, we began to hear on the radio that the river was swelling its banks and slowly spreading and cutting off all the passages back east. As we drove, we flew by empty houses next to the highway filled with dark water. Great mouthfuls were torn out of the countryside, and replacing that missing land was a waving stillness whose rising was so incremental, so unstoppable, it was answered internally with an equally black spill of fear. When we finally made it to the banks of the great river itself, wide as a small sea, we drove straight across its turgid waters on a vast suspended bridge. And just under the surface of that suspended moment of crossing, I carried another moment, when less than a day before, in northern Minnesota, I myself had spanned the infant river at its clear source in Lake Itasca. So slight and slender, I had put one foot on this shore and one foot on the other. A flood is just a widening of the between that causes a spilling of what was carried into what had carried it, an eclipse of the holding by what was held. Après moi le déluge, the French king says, and what he means is that he is the first singing sign of a reversal of the order of the world, another definition of to flood. But of course, we can all say this. The key is the word après, which means yes, after, but also means below, and most importantly, beyond, the direction whose mercy we all float along. This is the moment when I admit to you that I have discovered time travel to be possible, and that I was ultimately taught this by translating the pain of a 9th century poet into English. To clarify, I do not mean that a body can move to a different time than the one they were born into, but rather, like a stitch, one can gather not just all the shores the self has touched, but others that have been shown to you clearly enough that you may claim them rightly as your own. Let me explain. We know the way fiction works is that the words cause certain chemicals in your brain to go through a mirroring dance without action that makes the rest of the brain feel as if what is being read to it is happening to it. The way poetry works is similar, but instead of action, it involves emotion. And this is where it gets a bit complicated, because emotion isn't mirrored or aped. Like light, it is perceived or it isn't. And if it is perceived or felt, then it is original, inseparable from any other time that it is. So a man, burning in grief, can send an arrow of words forward in time, can through centuries touch, can prove that years are not opaque but translucent, and thus can let those words, like light, pass through. Perhaps this is why to write is to dissipate the gloom, dilute the viscosity of the dark, because sometime, somewhere, now, someone else is lightening you. In the place of my childhood, floods came like lightning. They were immediate, a flash, an issue, an opening of water in the desert, an apparition made real. The rivers there are born torrentially like gods, whole and fully formed. Once in the spring after the snow melt, a friend and I went out to the arroyo to throw sticks into the whip-fast current that had appeared overnight. Suddenly, I no longer know why, I stripped down to my underwear and stepped into the rushing water. I remember being hypnotized by the speed as I walked to its center, the way its force hit me, enclosing me in its power. And then, where I had been standing, smiling, feeling the insistent pushing of the water against my legs, I was under, I was spun, I was thrown, down, around, away from the air. Time moves quick as water when you are about to drown, your flailing, your ragged breaths, just so many droplets, forced to rush in tandem along. Greater force holds you now, and not playfully in the least, tightens its hold. Then, just as I went completely under, I was thrown against a bank, a thin, outstretched arm of sand, and suddenly I was free. I walked back upstream to my friend, crying on the shore, and we went home. My mother made a fire, wrapped me in a blanket, and while I sat cross-legged, staring silently through the flames back into the mouth of the water, she brushed my hair. And then a much shorter piece. This is the first piece in the book. And this is the piece that taught me how to write this whole book. It's called temporal saturation. 1. Memory's inscription on the mind can be compared to afterburn on a retina after a flash of light. It is a physical enlightenment measured by the degree to which the gesture, the occurrence, the afterliving haunts the individual in blue repetition until they are released. The depth of this inscription and variations in its amplitude are a result of the phenomenon of temporal saturation, the explanation for why certain moments of your life seem to spill or shrink, to transcend or subvert their physical duration and color differently their surrounding time. Temporal saturation is an elusive measurement disproving any correlation between quantity and influence that is used to explain both the canyons that can appear inside moments of great rending, joyous or horrific, entombing an incarnation of the self which will never again exist, as well as the median intervals of floating passivity that resist recollection and whose ending is marked by a feeling of awakening, a drowsy startle, or a gradual reconsciousness. High levels of temporal saturation are evidenced by a languorous stretching of the experience present, which then refracts and amplifies the emotion of the moment. The joy making this spreading pleasurable, the fear terrible, though both poles can be described in terms of the sensation of falling, the difference being that the first is a falling into and the latter a falling through. Low levels of temporal saturation are evidenced by malaise, an involuntary refusal on the part of the individual to knit themselves to the place they occupy. Homesickness, the corporeal and spiritual longing for a physical and temporal point of greatest belonging, is the best diagnosis to describe these ebbs of existence. 2. So, the instance when in your room one afternoon you first reached for my face, placed your hands on either side and sighed. A sigh not of air escaping the lungs, but space escaping the heart, which suddenly I filled. And in that displaced space, that love broke around me. I drowned, I drown, I will forever drown. I burned, I burn, I will forever burn. And conversely, the feverish, restless years I spent in the city, insensate, starving, trying always to convince myself that I loved things I did not. The night I called a boy, a beauty, talking to him through the wide night window of the city, talking to him and to the city itself, arguing about who would come to whom across these streets, who would burrow crosstown through the inertia. Finally deciding to do nothing. We hung up. I left shortly afterwards, and years later saw him at a party where he told me how the part of him that called me and that I weakly tried to answer was dead, that he had killed it. This isn't an anecdote of the one who got away. It is evidence of a state and the proof that despite our magnetism, we both succumbed. And while some might posit that this was just the result of our indifference towards each other, the truth is we were both living through, which is the definition of surviving. No thing presented us with the hard edge of reality. No one acted on us with opposing and equal force, certainly not each other. Is that youth? I no longer know. The measurement of temporal saturation, then, can be used to quantify both the abscesses and the vividities, these gestures floating in great swaths of meaningless automation. Just as the atoms composing a human body can condense smaller than the head of a pin, the self can, like a black hole, collapse, like a poem reduce. And the proof of the emptiness that oceans those bright livings is how they sparkle and call to each other, despite the expanse of the interims, be they seconds, decades, lifetimes. Inlaid in space, they form the constellation of the soul. A final note. There will be certain people in the life of each of us, figures ringed in moth glow, who can be expressed as refrains of richest temporal saturation. They run like a weft through, becoming so inseparable, you ultimately cannot be defined without them. If you can recognize these people in their approach, they are the figures you will navigate by whom you will plot your journey. They represent the closest approximation to knowing another being, which of course has been proven over and over again to be impossible. Thank you.
Hello. And hi to people who are on Zoom. Can you hear me pretty well? Okay. Actually, let me get my water. Thank you, Chloe. Can of water. And thanks, Shira, for organizing this and inviting all of us. It's great to be here. I've never been to the Divinity School before. And thanks for coming, people who came in person and on Zoom. So I'm going to be reading from this book called The Garden, which is, as was said, the first of a trilogy called Overflow. And I guess what I would say about it is I didn't know what genre to refer to it as. So just for fun, I called it essay auto-fiction. No, auto-essay fiction. I don't know, something like that. I'm just going to set timer. Anyway, it's sort of essay, sort of poems, sort of fiction. And it's dealing with a lot of things. I guess one of the things it's dealing with, just to talk about this, because I like to talk about it, which is a painting by my uncle, Tony Robin. And it's a painting that is trying to depict a fourth dimensional space, which is a mathematical concept that does to three-dimensional space what three-dimensional space does to two-dimensional space. And fourth-dimensional space cannot really be seen in the real world, except when it's represented on through a computer-generated hypercube, which rotates. So that's all I can tell you about it, even though he's tried to tell me many, many times more than that. And there's a whole sort of chapter in here about him, which I'm actually not going to read. But I wanted you to know that one of the things about fourth dimensional space is that it was an idea that was really beloved by Picasso and other painters and poets from the early 20th century, including Apollinaire, who's a poet that I've translated and really love. And I think what those modernists were attracted to by the concept of fourth dimensional space was the idea that one could perceive things in a way that, or that things could exist in a way that was different than how we perceive them. And that maybe it would be possible to perceive the world in a completely different way through a kind of, an opening of the mind. And another world of thought or field of thought that I think is interested in that as well is quantum field theory, which also plays a big role in this book, which I'm also not going to be reading that part. But quantum field theory as practiced by Karen River Barad, who thinks about quantum field theory as a kind of I would say model, but I don't think that they would say that. I think a reality through, if we only really understood and incorporated, we would understand the world to be completely different than how we actually experience it. So those worlds of thought have informed this writing, and I don't know that you'll be able to tell that at all by what I read, but I just thought it's fun to talk about, so I would tell you. So this book is dedicated to both of those people, Tony Robbin and River Barad, and who was my teacher, I should have said, and so somebody that I have reconnected with. And it starts with an epigraph from Paul Celan, the poet Paul Celan, "Perhaps I was everyone." In the end and at the beginning, I just wanted to think about the woman smoking on the planter's edge. The smoke leaves her mouth widening like a firth before it enters mine. We breathe, we bathe, we feel each other's heat. The cities inside our bodies kept our bodies alert. I sat at the cafe table and my eye itched. Then my cheek preferred her cheek. I was aging, as if a rock growing lichened by a ruin. The apples fall, pungent and then brown, rot, as all along the hell strips, child-sized bathtubs or coffins with scarcely a foot between deter rest. Because I am allergic to wine, I drink it. From crown to vulva, I am poisoned, a mild intransigence against the self. These once vigorous clouds, with their collapsing fibrous folds, trace the edges of our little oxygen tent. But first and last, rapture in its short, tumbling stints, without which I cannot light a flame or see. She smokes and will not know how it enters me, how I am not so much afraid as desirous of it, like I am of the sense of the hallways of Eastern European buildings where I will never have yet been. It was Monday. I felt it appropriate to listen to the pundits laugh. Curled on my side, I pretended to be alone. A pale, wan scholar was the curtain, studying me. The lucent blue war machine had lodged in an old woman's house, as if an excessive wind come to whip the world. But not the whole world. Yes, the whole world. Whipped. Next, a photograph of hair. No, a photograph of barbed wire that in its blur resembled hair reflected in the window of a moving train showed up in my notes file. My mouth was firmly shut against the whipped up dust, but the blood pooling under the skull of a new arrival to the morgue, I took it as a passport, a hall pass, a prayer shawl, a portal, an April, sun, our parent, rising to burst, grotesque in its self-immolation. The back of me anticipates that bath. I hovered there in a fellow feeling that hurt, as she, my smoker, my friend, was back in the cycles of her fire, flood, fire, into which one might forever fall. The faint sting of dish soap will linger on your lip regardless. Similarly, my friend, the diviner, had reams of paperwork still to do. We sat, eating potato chips, surrounded by children who had come to see the bones and the stones. These bone-seeking children moved in groups, sorted by size. The smaller, the more often fed. The larger, the louder. Limbs in motion like scythes through meadows they made for themselves away. I was watching her eyes. We leaned on a railing overlooking the duck pond. A lone duck came near with its green sheen of a neck. I watched the duck, but as intently and at the same time, I watched her eyes, bordered by no makeup, infant-like in their nakedness, at once in her face and just under the surface of the pond. Sliding from here to there, they determined what the diviner saw. She saw, she told me, a tower, the salt still in our mouths. The air was cold, but not cold enough. But I am so glad, she'd said earlier, from her soft and low seat in the museum's bone room, that my parents are dead. Never have I felt closer to them. The synthetic flavor of our safety, we swallowed it with the salt, the reams of paperwork, the wild limbs of adolescents seeking bones, for the killing moves all throughout. That night, as I walked, stalked, or stomped through rooms, carrying it, the killing, the vice principal's breath was in my ear and was shaky. I hear you, he'd say through his uneven breath. My daughter, he'd say, breathing unevenly. I would never send her to school if I were afraid. Both of us knowing our luck catches fire in the night. For that day, and again on the next, my daughter had cried on my chest for the fallen. Her hair wet, cried on my body, her t-shirt wet, and I'd walked again into the cold park that wasn't nearly cold enough. The geese over my hard head getting harder, my hardened head, my almost dead head, pushed their wings, the surrounding air, until I fell back on my back, the sun going down. I was, as if a child, becoming transparent by standing perfectly still, as Yoko Ono had instructed. I should have said that one of the things the book is preoccupied with is both the after effects of war, but also the interrelationships between all wars. Because of the new war, that was also the old wars, the wars that had, like marrow to the bone, fed our hungry childhoods. My father and I were talking in the park, though only I was there in body. His voice panicking my head. Worst case scenario, he'd say, and I'd cut him off. What's the best case scenario? I kept asking, while pushing myself faster into trees. But as I should have known, sorrowing ones do not often want options. Draw a line, erase the line. Draw a line of yourself, erase it, Yoko Ono advised. But the I was missing the child who'd sent the swastika, earlier story, and missing his sister whose birthday was coming up. Awakened by drunken revelers who soon were sobbing and vomiting and then were smoking in quiet repose, I thought alternately of these siblings, of how much I was longing to see them, and I thought of all the antagonists I cannot repatriate inside my head, even those who share, as they say, the blood of my heart. She folds the page, stands at the window to watch the magenta clouds fade. Her nails, she notices, have grown too long. Sunlight rouses the city. Paradise is only ever a thought. And this is from the last section, which is called The Dancers. I showed my friend the comic The Weeds. Her child rubbed a radish clean. Very unsure of the lettuce, I nonetheless thinned. Soon a guy on a motorcycle. Oh, I'm getting a call. Okay, never mind. Okay. Soon a guy on a motorcycle showed up. Astride, he asked about the poetry, but the poetry was done. Sky still light, we yanked rhubarb stalks. I'd put my study of the blasts to one side, for there were other things pressing. A bullet had put a hole in Ocean's t-shirt. It was hard to imagine how this had happened in the parking lot of the rec center. How that bullet had run right through her t-shirt without even grazing her skin. A different girl was actually shot. They called her a female juvenile. My female juvenile went to dinner with her friend. A man on Colorado told them to touch his cock. "It's so hard," he said to them. They, 14, shifted their orientation. Never, I told her, head down an alley or a quiet street, and other impossible instructions. My friend, the comic, had ventured a theory, a compost theory. If enough garbage is piled up, she said, might it eventually grow things? But had this theory, so far, proven true? I'd been patient in my way, with the trashed highway borders, with the humid weight of things, until, seated at a campground with my phone in my palm, I'd read about the drying up lake with arsenic in its depths. Once freed to become dust in the air, this arsenic would do what arsenic does. A small girl asked me what I was up to. "Getting water," I answered as I filled my bottle at the pump. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," she said, and stayed. "Where are you from?" I asked her, a question that produced only confusion. She said a word. It might have been a street name. Age was clearer. 5. Asked her what she was planning for the day. "To play with my dog." "Yes," I said, "that is a good plan." We parted, I with water, she in pink shorts. Then things got even quieter. For it was true, and had always been true. One might choose to leave it. And by leaving it, leaving life, its fires and ash, its smoke and windows, its dogs on leashes and dogs running free, its forests and gardens, its meals and restaurants, its text threads, its workouts, its little waves lapping, its gutter trash photo essays, conceptual art projects, its pottery, its memorials, stalled clocks, and mothers, its mothers in chairs by doors with newborns, or by doors alone. One might leave also the shoes. Worn down or new, the courtyards of weeds and recycling bins, the mosques built over the sea, the boys leaping into rivers. One might leave it, and in doing so, leave geese overhead, gunshot wounds, calendars, hallways, and bridges bombed and bridges left standing. It's honey. One might choose to leave its honey and its rhythm sections, even those. One might choose to leave all paint behind, all colors and flowers, and all colors and skies. Might choose against fabric, against mirrors, against stones, the tiny ones tucked into pockets, and the huge ones for eons immobile. One might choose to leave all languages, including all dialects, including even the language of hands, and the isolate languages like Haida and Basque, connected to no other languages on earth. One might choose to leave all conversations behind, with those with strangers on elevators, ferry boats, or sidewalk cafes. Leave waiters carrying fancy desserts. Leave coffee and the many ways it is made. Leave also shouting and song, all singers and squares, all children in back seats belting out pop tunes, wedding bands and trumpet players on rooftops or in parks. Also dancing. One might choose to leave it, dancing, behind, the small dances one does in one's head, the big dances on stages or alone in museums. Where am I? The dancing that is mostly hugging, and also hugging while swaying, breathing, and the dancing that is stomping, or merely the tight C curves of hips in jeans inside bars. Also, walking. One might, even if one has been a lover of walks through cities alone, leave walking fully behind. One might leave behind picnics in parks with friends, the mess that must be gathered, the friends as they rise and turn away, and the recounting of dreams, the dreaming of them. One might leave, in fact, rest, and also then sleep, the longing for it, the relief of it, and the waking. Waking alone in a hotel bed, waking beside someone who is also waking. Banks, boats, pet shops, and insects. The strange ones you do not know the names of, and the tiny ants that crawl under doors. One might leave them all, in a sense, behind. Leave also then humidity, salt in food, and salt on skin, and the salt that lives in the blood of the body. One might choose to leave it. The pulsing body, the aching, the crying, the ecstatic body, the legs that kept carrying you up and down stairs along both paved and unpaved roads. One might choose to leave the body, and with it, all desire. Desire for sex, for food, for water, for release, and even desire for time, for more of it. Even all impatience, all distraction, all fear. One might choose then, thereby, to never anymore want anything at all. Or, like the glaze on the mud of the cove at low tide, one could, for now, remain. They were dancing. They were dancing when the reporter called. The women were learning to lift their knees in a particular way, to then bend their lower leg around their partner's leg, to slightly sway back while bending and hooking, and in this way, lifting, bending, hooking, they stabilized themselves while slightly destabilizing the other. With an arm around her waist, he, at the same time, captured and caressed her. The room in which they, all elderly, danced was unfinished. Exposed pipes and electrical wires, uncapped, dangled from the ceiling. A mannequin stood, facing out the dusty window. Hips down, it was a stick. The mannequin wore a coat of many colors, like Joseph, who saw the future in dreams, who saved his own life and the lives of his people by reading dreams. A man came by. He'd been finding things in the trash. A piece of wood painted white. It might have been part of a chair. Now it was a thing he was carrying. He, like me, leaned in toward the window. They are dancing. They are learning to dance, he said. Yes, I said, as my husband, his voice cracking and very quick, spoke to the reporter about our friend Ma, who had been shot. Standing, as we were, outside the unfinished room, behind the dirty window, facing the faceless mannequin, we could hear no music at all, but we could see the music in their bodies, the 6 dancers, entwined. 2 other women sat in chairs in the back, quietly watching the others. Were they, I asked him, the teachers? Or were they, in some sense, guardians? Or were they simply waiting their turn? Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was beautiful, Julie and Chloe. And I'm just noticing a through line about turning back to life after some kind of near-death, literal or metaphorical. Might be something we talk about tomorrow, like what allows that? What brings us back? And thank you to Shira and everybody for being here. I'm going to read a little bit from this new book, Apprentice to a Breathing Hand, and then I'm going to read briefly from an excerpt from another project, which I'll explain. Can everybody hear me all right? elusive. First advice: if you can't find your desk, or you don't have a desk, you still have to clear debris. First, the horse's head, then the bird outside the frame, then the window, then the one forsaken leaf, orange and desiccated, caught in abandoned web. Push the calendar away from the floating heart given to you by the radiance of undoing. If your light falls adamantly forward, scarring your efforts, see this as kissing paper. Look carefully at the fortunes pasted around you. If you find carnelian, take off your hands. Place train ticket atop subway card, atop golden folder, atop receipt, atop rags, atop regret, atop a shell with a hole for threading. Place your head inside notebooks you cannot bear to have borne. Run away with yourself. If you've ever written breath, you know exactly the color of ice with live violets in centers, whispers. A message or an image may pierce the 1,000 small ailments. Sitting out of doors, note rising heat and maelstroms. A mind was on the ground, under the table, for everyone to see. We put on our best imitation of a person, but it was not good enough. We averted our eyes. We lay there writhing. Poor thing, we should have said before going on with our dinner, but instead, we said nothing. We excused ourselves, climbed the stairs, and locked the doors. And here we are, sorting membranes from letters, hypotheses from paintings. Leave us to our alchemy. Forms will emerge. If you can't find your rest, or if you don't have any rest, you will still need a place to be horizontal, preferably beneath the lunar awning. I tried to explain this, but my breath was silver, and my hands I could never find. You retrieve scraps of lace and place them to my lips as if to reverse utterance. Leave me to sand, candles, bedding. My body, in my own possession, kept changing. What I sought was more elusive than shadow. Erasure. A sage of the rose family draws red vibrations with breath. A crowned snake deserves your full attention, seeks emptiness, runs toward an uninhabited room in tears of elation. An empty egg remembers sweeping forms braided from light, remembers the return of maidens, palpitations, nocturnal sapience. Erase yourself to know a former cannot be found in reflection. Engage remedies to aid this process, not to stop movement toward sepia labyrinth with vials, bloodroot, phosphorus, windflower. See yourself through every guise as stones approach. I laughed at overdoing while unpacking an imaginary terrace of gossamer. If I lived in a world safe for women. When you wake with non-visible parts broken in a non-matrifocal culture as an infant crone, torn wing and tongue. Affection is also filmy gaze, smashed curtains trailing, hurling reveries as we stow ethereal limbs above. Vivid. Enter this cocoon, a cave of breath, free from tending to others. Empty of seething sun, rest your blood until you are only waves inside a shell, an open palm. As though blowing out a candle, you become vivid, a name for red, a ceremony. In her bundle, she carries the first secret, sun roses, solitude. Inside a pink cloud, describe yourself as fetal, a feathered aura permitted to linger. Invite 7 directions beneath the lunar awning. Yellow butterfly pressed against sight, against backdrop of verdancy. Ask for their blessings as you turn. And 2 poems to do with owls. Ululation. They love the owl more than ridiculousness. They went for a walk, looking for owls, and emerged owl-headed, unrustling. They called to owls, but saw only hovering foxes. They were so disappointed, it didn't matter that no one had ever before seen sky foxes. They tried to be light, failed. Everything was distant except for the land. They begged expansiveness, breath spirits, seals and passages beyond return. At the threshold, they walked beyond non-place to unsound. Nesting. I woke helpless, covered in white down, with eyes closed. I'm told the egg was pale, with rough surface of swamps, stream sides, uplands. The moon was orange with smoke, dust, and pollen. To present-day viewers, residential nests are like picture postcards. They remind us of a unique living style of a bygone age. Typical features to be found in a nest include a half-height screen door, a sliding floor with horizontal stars, carved woolen screens, etched feather windows, and twig spirals. With the passage of time, signs of wear have appeared on matting, mud, and ornamental leaves. Once functional, trees have now become witnesses of beheading and uprooting called development. My nest was in a natural cavity in an old forest with dead trees in the distance between self and face. A world head fledgling. Recent decades have seen the demolition of many nests and rarely the refurbishment of their interiors. Architectural components of old-styled nests from those demolished residences face total oblivion. I have succeeded in preserving some and include them in this exhibition. First, I prepared the story surface, then learned to strike intruders with feet. I preserved some nests by burying them in pockets, others by lacing third eyes. I learned to wear nests on my head, to translate duets, cackles, and haws. I learned to store narration in the crook of a branch or the top of a snag, to swallow whole, head first, and then body. And then in a minute, Shira's going to come up and open this file for me. I just wanted to say a little bit about this. So I did a year-long durational project in which I attempted to create self-portraits every day in writing and in all kinds of visual mediums. And the idea behind it was really kind of a spiritual inquiry. So not necessarily like, what do I look like and how do I represent myself, but this age-old ancient question of asking, who am I? And why am I here? And so this is just a little excerpt, and I'm going to show some of the self-portraits, which you'll notice like this, it doesn't necessarily look like me, but it's a self-portrait. So I'm just going to read there's 8 minutes of slides. I'll read from this. All right. No, thank you, Shira. Let's see if this works. It's supposed to advance every 10 seconds. If it doesn't work, I can advance. As if that trunk were my torso, corseted, stitched in pictures, gathering every day is not a difficult task, but what I want to know is how to sift, arrange, and compile, sustain an ongoing season. Angels and rose women mirror first attempts. Why, where, were, you was a phrase. Under or intuit, quiver. The woods walked through redacted night, covering an unmade face pressed into green. Rustle of thirsts, fronds, quills, points. What does one look like? Love beyond instruction, a serious attempt, or not a severe try, a series of how do I actually listen with words. A rigorous while to demystify, trusting paper children not to move or disappear, gold from yesterday, now solid snow, takes hold of what is essentially my own hands made, a teapot placed on the head, the way attitude, sledding softly, makes chandeliers as if glow weren't bedding. A difficult codicil advises what the music said. Take what you want, like a celebrity or a man, move in and out of the family without quilted apology, photograph this, not knowing how. A sense of anyone's importance, enough time considering the eminence of everyone else. Everyone else includes a song, abruptly awake. I didn't anticipate needing to learn this again. Enough time considering the eminence of everyone else. Everyone else includes a song, abruptly awake. I didn't anticipate needing to learn this again. This again is still a girl. Girls move seamlessly in butter, and matter is concerning. Still, I haven't learned to move deftly through the river of communications we call bodies. Negligence and negligee share a few consonants. Negotiations aren't opening tulips on the table. It's the water I replenish and pour into becoming invisible. This isn't a good look, not the action or the absence of conversation, even though I mostly identify with the flowers, though I'm trying to adopt alternate ways for my pact, not impact or compact, but to stand upright as any vessel composing reproductive starts. Stop struggling with every verb, a way to die subtly without reference to hands, or I don't want my self-portrait to be an arrow drawn between intrusive inner barter, excavates, silence. Are you willing to wake up? A wide, divisive lake is rising from unceremonious ask, all the years to rest, help a greater pain, pause if I ask, which sister, which sister? Shorten refractions, staves out of the woods that they do not exist, dense, incarnate. Woods assist sisterlings, the throne come, throne comb, thorns thrum, a maze wherein I ask systems to skirt, hem hymns, to lace, immaterial bodice. House unhooks, enters face, missing from hands. Once I drew the progression of a fall until my form found ground. Then I tried to draw kneeling and standing, and then seedlings rising, every sketch a little higher, impossible to mirror growth in death, and yet the other choice is to reflect eclipse for the ones crossed and those who remain only partially here, marginally living, which is why I'm trying to learn my legs and not only alarms, but the necessity of sleeplessness now to photograph dreams where every word spurs charm and disaster. Letters addressed to me from the dead, still entirely breathing and awake. I'd like to get ahead of myself, or at least ahead of my shadow. Still unaware of my place in the story, of conditions that approach like eyes from either side of a dark wood, 100 million lanes through ancient sentient trees. Maybe I should put on my red coat and practice in these perspicacious woods. What I say to myself must first be translated from sounds of footsteps up and down stairs to question how to make a pomegranate appear as a pomegranate and not an apple in the photograph. And so I asked the wrong sister again, and her answer arrives as perforated sighs. One mother red and blue and necessary as light, the other mother yellow and blue has lost all of her hands, feet, ears, and eyes until she can only eat or speak. She remains a moth. a mouth. I learned not to reply, that ply is from plied, from plead and pleat. Be clear, my plate, you are already free. Bend and fold until thighs are horizontal and then heels rise off the ground. Let me be clear let me be unclear when clarity is forgery, myth and misrepresentation. Find another set of objects with which to shroud my features, cloth candles and burning bells. I said to my dear, crystals and feathers, take me to your plumed and faceted kin. Make lists of assignments, room by room. Movement is the first subject. Books, hands, the body. What disturbed me most wasn't visible, as if looking at a blank sheet of paper and expecting immediate reflection. If I could draw the aura wrapped in sonic gowns, flowers at night, partially indigo, contract, go silent, seethe, and wait. How to stay in touch with an absence, suddenly stopped thinking, child, hood benign, makes a long lilt. Need to be exactly alone, baseline, no one else here, then entire exhalation happens. Still snow on hidden roof, broom, crystal, bromeliad, collage, and third eye. Whatever it is, I must do it first, thing in the morning, as if every hour were now. Where to become quietness? What did collaged lives say? Obscure face with flowers, or try to fit oneself into a cabinet. Erase faux protection of distance, dictation. How would this work in language? How to walk through it? I'll put on my fire dress, hold bromeliad and candle. Borrow a coat of red and yellow, fall into the arms of purple. I'll stop there. Thanks.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu, copyright 2025, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.